One of my favorite books in recent years is called The Great Plant-Based Con by Jane Buxton. Why eating a plants-only diet won't improve your health or save the planet. Now, I really appreciate this book, and I've brought it up several times on Redacted, and we've invited the author, Jane Buxton, to come on, and she graciously accepted. This is her first time on Redacted, so thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's good to talk to you.
You as well. Now, my own sort of, I guess, philosophy is that not eating animal-based foods makes me personally feel terrible. And
Mhm.
eating more processed food exacerbates that. But you lay out exactly all of the ways that we are sold meatless diets based on a bill of goods. And I wanted to ask you to go over it for our audience. First of all, the planet business, that eating meat is bad for the planet. You take that and poke a billion holes in that. And I think it's really, it reads almost like a fiction novel because you do such a great job. So can you address the climate-based lie that tells us not to eat meat?
Well, the main underlying premise of the lie, the big one that we hear about, is emissions most of the time. I mean, sometimes people talk about water use and sometimes they talk about land use, but it's mainly emissions right now because countries around the world are very, very focused on their net zero targets and getting those emissions down in every country and across every industry. But what I say in the book, and in fact, even more evidence has come to light since I finished the book, is that the contribution of livestock to those emissions is just wildly exaggerated. I mean, wildly. The exaggeration that is put about, for instance, in mainstream documentaries like Cowspiracy and indeed in much of the press, is that livestock are responsible for about 50% of emissions, and that couldn't be further from the truth. That's an exaggeration of at least 3 times on the official number. Then you get to the fact that the official number is also an exaggeration. And it's exaggerated because we use a metric, not to get too technical about this, but there's a metric that's being used to calculate it, which unfairly penalizes livestock and underplays the importance of, say, fossil fuel-based industries. So those things combined mean we're getting a skewed picture. Now, that doesn't mean that livestock farmers don't have things to do. Every industry has things to do to improve, to make sure that we're caring for the land, for biodiversity, for soil health levels, to improve methane emissions and reduce those. But it's not nowhere near the sort of culprit that it's painted as being. This is the point I'm really making.
Right, but then you take a look at the planetary impact of monocrops, which are really the
Mhm.
basis of plant-based diets. So for instance, seed oils or
Mhm.
grains and things like that that you have to bulk up on selling to the public if they are going to choose to not eat meat. And you do an excellent job talking about how that leads to soil degradation. And we pretend that that's not even a thing. I didn't write it down, but there's a TED Talk that you suggest that I went and looked up, the man, and now it's been
Might have been
called,
Alan Savory. Was it Alan
about the
Savory?
man in Africa who uses
Yes,
livestock to
the soil
regenerate.
degradation. Exactly.
Yes. Okay. I'm going to
Yeah.
link to that in the show notes.
Mhm.
So now we've sort of looked away from these types of solutions. Can you talk about
Absolutely.
soil degradation of monocrops by
Yeah.
monocrops?
So what we've done with industrial farming methods, monocrop farming, which we introduced around about the 1950s, depending on where you are in the world, is we got huge yields out of that. But in the process, we were slowly, gradually reducing the health of the soil every year because of the use of external inputs. Um, uh, you know, uh, Nitrogen fixing inputs, fossil fuel based fertilizers and pesticides and all of those things. What they've created is a very weak, a very undernourished soil, which has resulted in undernourishment of the plants, which then gives us less nourishment. So it's a terribly vicious circle. And you're right that we don't hear about this. Again, because as I said, net zero and carbon emissions has become the number one thing that people talk about. Is we've got tunnel vision on that, carbon tunnel vision. And that really started around around about 2018, 19, I think, when we started to talk about net zero. And so we seem to be obsessed by that, and we're forgetting about this other huge catastrophe which is going on in the world, which is soil degradation and desertification, which is something that Alan Savory does talk about. Is that's when all your soil just simply becomes like dust and you have nothing growing there, and it blows away, and then you can't absorb water, and that's why you have floods, and the whole thing again is a vicious cycle. So if we can reverse that desertification, we can do a whole lot for the planet. We can start to absorb more of that carbon. So we sort of solve two problems in one, as it were. And I would just love to see more focus on that and see more people putting their money behind that.
Now, one of the things on Alan Savory's talk called How to Fight Desertification and Reverse Climate Change is that the TED organization has since marked it as controversial because what he said was that he was able to use livestock, move them around these places that were showing terrible desertification. And because now there's this ideological capture against ruminant animals, they've marked that as political when really it should be.
Is this the official fact checkers? Is this the official statement you're getting?
Yes, if you look on Ted's website under his talk, they've said, well, this is controversial now. It wasn't 10 years ago. And it's a really moving piece about a man who had made really heartbreaking decisions about killing off elephants and things like that. So, it is totally political. You take up Eat Lancet, who is the organization that continues to push plant-based diets and show how they are now a political organization more than anything else. Can you talk about that?
Well, I mean, they were formed as a political organization, so they weren't entirely interested in human health or in saving the environment purely in the beginning, and so they're an amalgamation of people. 90% of the people on their commission are already vegetarians or vegans, or affiliated with organizations to do with those two diets. So you already have a bias in what they're going to be recommending. They then have a link up with organizations like the UN Food Commission and the WEF, and therefore they form a kind of group of elite organizations who are looking to change the world in the image that they prescribe, that they think is the best. It's a very top-down image. It's a mistaken image, in my view. But because it's all these organizations that have this supposed authority in the world, a lot of people accept them and say, well, they must be correct. And what people don't realize is that the science underlying their recommendations is not always correct. And so the Eat Lancet diet, for instance, has been shown to be nutritionally deficient. It just does not have enough. And they themselves have admitted, as I said in the book, and you probably remember this, they admitted that it wasn't suitable for babies or toddlers or teenagers or young adults or pregnant women or frail people, sick people. So you're thinking, well, who is this for, this diet? Who can it possibly be adequate for? It's quite a big list of people who are excluded. It was also shown by a number of analysts to be unaffordable by most of the world. So we do need to think about diets in the context of the different climates in different countries, the different cultures, the different economic circumstances. And if a diet, there simply is no one prescriptive diet that will fit the whole world. So the very idea on which these organizations are based, to me, seems problematic. The idea that you can centrally dictate and determine what is best for every single person on the planet.
Now, this was interesting to me, thinking about who is in power promoting what diet, was the history of the food pyramid in the United States and how it goes back to the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And the woman who had a vision about this had her book prescribed by one of the Kellogg family. Yeah. And that leads us to where we are today. I found that really fascinating. Can you give us a little synopsis of it? And then again, I'm going to ask my readers to read it for themselves.
Sure. So the woman you're talking about is Ellen G. White, who was the founder of the Seventh-day Adventist Church back in 1863, who allegedly had a vision from God. about a number of things, but one of those things was the way people were supposed to eat to be pure. And that was a vegetarian diet. And so henceforth, her writing was based on that principle. And her protege, John Harvey Kellogg, was typing out her documents and helping her distribute her pamphlets. And he absorbed that kind of message. He then went on to found Kellogg's, the great cereal company, to provide food that was not meat, something that would give people their nutrition, he thought, without being sinful, because he thought that meat caused all kinds of sins. And then it didn't stop there, because John Harvey Kellogg founded, he sort of coached and brought on board a number of nutritionists, including one very, very influential dietitian called Lena Cooper, who founded the Dietetic School of America, who wrote the textbook that was used by all these dietitians, and who then started to infiltrate her ideas, her books, her proteges infiltrated the U.S. Dietary Guidelines Commission. And so you see that religious influence carrying all the way through to something that we now see in modern day America and around the world as this dietary advice. And there are many people who sit on that guidelines commission today who are also Seventh-day Adventists, also vegetarians, and who share those beliefs which have some origin in religion, not in health and science.
Recently, the American government released a preliminary study saying that processed foods is actually not a contributor to obesity.
I saw that.
And I thought that was hilarious. But again, I go back to your research showing just how much corporate influence there is in government dietary recommendations. So I throw that out with the trash now. So who do we trust?
That's the right thing to do. That's definitely the right thing to do.
It feels like the right thing to do. And I will say, it's not just about my own health. I have two adolescents who are in the throes of their growth phases and their stages of puberty. And I am supremely interested in optimizing that for them. And I don't want any politics in the growth of their bodies. So who would you trust then, if not our own governments?
Oh, yeah, that is such a good question. And I get asked that all the time. And I'm quite often stumped, because who to trust is a very big question. I think you trust yourself, first of all. So take responsibility for your own health and for really finding out not only what's best for you, but the truth behind some of these studies. So I'm afraid if somebody really wants to be informed, they have to go and look at the study that's being quoted, look at who funded it, decide what influence that might have, look at the conclusions, and look at some of the data to see if it matches. And if it doesn't, or if you don't have time to do that, by the way, there are other people that do it for you. So there's a woman who does this every Monday. Her name's Zoe Harcum, Dr. Zoe Harcum. She is a godsend, because she takes every one of these studies, or most of the important ones, and she dissects them for us and really does a full, thorough analysis. And what you begin to realize on reading her documentation and her website, which is the best £50 you'll ever spend for a year, by the way, if you want to be really educated, is you realize that 99% of these studies are trash.
Yeah.
Absolute trash. So then where do you go for health information? You look for what I call mechanisms. So try and understand not this high-level epidemiology, which is so misleading, but go to the people who write about what the body needs and what foods that comes in. And, for instance, there's a fantastic psychiatrist called Dr. Georgia Ede. I mentioned her in the book, and she's got a new book out. She writes about all the things that brains need, healthy brains. Where do you find those? You find them in certain foods. And here's the clue, it's not plant foods.
Right.
And she describes the actual medical pathways, the biological pathways from point A to point B in terms of brain health and how these foods contribute. To me, that's what you can trust. You can trust something like that, which is giving you the biology, not the epidemiology. So basically, that would be a guide. Throw all the epidemiology in the trash.
And also, you take bit by bit a lot of these components of plant-based
Mm.
diets, for instance, plant-based milks or
Mhm.
seed oils or other types of fillers that the human body just doesn't like. And
Mhm.
so for me, I sort of take that as a guideline. And then I will say, I am a fan of those people who do Instagrams or YouTube videos around the
Yeah.
grocery store and say,
Yeah, yeah,
see
yeah.
this, it's got this, and this, it's got this. And that helps. But those are
Yeah.
by no means any kind of official organization. It just helps me navigate the processed food grocery market.
Yeah, and it doesn't matter if they're official because they're pointing to something you can actually see. It's
Right,
true what they're saying. They hold up a package, there'll be 25 ingredients, there'll be sugar mentioned 10 times sometimes
right.
because these manufacturers, as you know, they were alert to the whole excess sugar warning. And so they have sugar in about 10 different forms in each of their products. So people have to learn how to decipher those labels. So I'm with you. I love all these influencers who are doing that. There's one we have here called Eddie Abu, who is
Oh,
just
yes.
taking the world by storm.
Yes.
He speaks a young language and he's really reaching people. I find that incredibly heartening.
Yes, I love him too. Now, I guess I'll ask you this and then I'll let you go. A lot of these diets, a vegan diet or a zone-based diet, or back in the 90s, we had low-cal diets. They sort of have a peak
Mhm.
and they ebb and flow. Although the study we just mentioned, the US government did say, well, it really is about calories. And I thought, what? That's 30 years
Mm.
ago. We're not going
Mm.
back to that. Do
Mm.
you think, because you mentioned there are so many what you call late stage vegans who just feel terrible trying to follow these guidelines, do you think that it will follow this popularity bell curve and we will maybe see it fade in popularity, or is there too much institutional capture to let that happen?
Wow, there is so much institutional capture, and there's so much capture by the zeitgeist, if I can say that. I
Yes.
don't think in the past, all these diets that you mentioned, Zone or Atkins or any of the others, for instance, or Weight Watchers, they would attract a certain population, but they wouldn't get this kind of mainstream coverage and support. And this diet, the vegan diet, is now supported not by what people claim for health benefits, but this whole argument about the environment, the argument about animal welfare, it's like that three-legged stool. It's pretty sturdy, right? You can't really knock it over as easily as the other diets. So I think it's going to take a while for the heat to die down. But I do think it will die down eventually because I think people are cottoning on to some of the lies that are being told, and they're cottoning on to the health detriment. Because, people can try any diet they want, and a lot of people will maybe try a vegan diet and they will thrive on that for a certain period of time because they're coming off another terrible diet, the standard American diet, which is pretty awful. But eventually those nutrient deficiencies are going to kick in because they just have to, and there'll be some sort of muscle loss. There'll be a B12 deficiency, which will cause neurological symptoms potentially. There'll be a vitamin A deficiency, etc., because they won't be able to convert the vitamin A. So eventually those things will happen. And so I think that the vegan diet will have a limited number of proponents naturally set because of that natural limitation in the nutrients. And I do hope that, combined with people being more aware of some of the misconceptions around the environment, hopefully that will start to get us talking not about vegan diets or vegetarian diets, but about proper human diets. And this is a phrase which is being used often now: proper human diet, a diet that we were meant to eat, that has everything that we need in it.
Oh, I like that. I hadn't heard this before. Okay, I'm going to be on the lookout for this new phrase and I will
Yeah.
use it myself. I just ask because, you see in restaurants what's popular and what's not. This weekend I was in England and I ordered a whole milk latte and they gave
Okay.
me an oat milk latte, I guess because of my accent.
Right.
And I saw the sticker on the top and I said, "Oh no, I'm not drinking this." And I brought it back and she said, "We don't have whole milk." And I was like, "What?
Yeah.
You don't have it?" She goes, "Only skinny, whatever, whatever." And I said, "Okay, I'm hoping that this becomes popular now. That let's switch away from this towards this.
Yeah, but
So,
I think it's great if people keep going in and asking for the things that are okay, and don't apologize. Don't apologize for your whole milk,
right.
or your butter, or whatever else, you know. And actually, I I don't like being a pain at restaurants, but I think I will in future be asking restaurateurs, do you cook this in seed oil or olive oil or butter? Because if it's in seed oil, I don't want it.
Yeah.
And that might be a good way to register with them that that's not such a healthy option.
There you go. Okay. Well, I'm in it with you. We're looking to promote proper human diets. Thank you again for your book. Thank you for your time and coming on Redacted. I want to again let people know that they can pick up the book. It's called The Great Plant-Based Con, and it is absolutely worth your time. Thank you. It was so lovely to meet you. Please come back on Redacted some other time.
Thank you so much.